Welcome back to my weekly pick-me-up, House of the Dragon. This is my episode 7 spoiler-free review, but before we do that, I need to talk about yet another Hollywood star trying to sabotage their own show/movie by injecting their issues/politics/moralizing into said show/movie. This week, it is Emma Darcy, who took over the role of Princess Rhaenyra from Millie Alcock last episode. Now, so far, she has been pretty good. Not great, and definitely not as good as Millie Alcock, more on that later, but serviceable within the context of the role she has written for her. However, the level of stupid she came up with this week in an interview with Annabelle Nugent of The Independent over in the UK was next level stuff. In the context of Emma Darcy identifying as non-binary, she came out with, quote-unquote, "Look, I really like playing women, and I'm really good at it," unquote. She added some stuff after that about not wanting to be pigeonholed in only female roles or being misgendered, but that sentence was just emblematic of the insanity of our age. Earlier in the interview, Darcy was going on about gender ideology as seen through the role of Rhaenyra, and what she goes through in the course of the show. For those interested, I will link the article in the description. Now personally, I'm a you do you sort of person, as long as you are not hurting anyone else or infringing on their liberties. But there are limits to that which are being ignored in our current culture, and common sense on this sort of thing stepped beyond the bounds years ago. But that is a topic for a different sort of channel. The reason I brought it up in the context of House of the Dragon is because those in Hollywood in particular, and in business more broadly these days, seem to have completely forgot what their goal in entering the marketplace with a good or service is. Ignoring the very big exception of niche goods and services, which House of the Dragon is not, the general desire is to get as many people giving you money for your good or service as possible. So the more you alienate sections of society, the fewer people are willing to engage you in that commerce. Television is slightly different since the exchange has intermediaries, but the principle is still the same. And Hollywood's denizens and the denizens of Hollywood's cousins across the pond largely seem intent on doing as much damage via the media as they possibly can by running their mouths on issues they should know damn well are going to drive people away in droves. Usually it is politics. And I guess the whole gender ideology crusade has become political, given the authoritarian nature of many of the proponents of it. However, religion, social issues, and other highly charged topics are ones those trying to pimp their products should be staying away from as they go about enticing people to them. Instead, Hollywood seems bound and determined to drive people away. Now that is harder to do when your product is good, which House of the Dragons has been thus far. But there are others, many others, who have not been so fortunate as to find that rare unicorn in Hollywood these days, namely good writers. The perfect example of that is House of the Dragon's competition over on Amazon Prime, Rings of Power. If you want a master class on what not to do, go back about a year and a half, and start reading everything the clowns over there have done. Watch all of their teasers, trailers, promotional videos, and behind-the-scenes stuff, and then watch that crap fest in action every week. Oh, and the daily attempts to make it look like they have a hit on their hands. House of the Dragons has not been perfect in their execution, and the article I referenced is yet another example of it. There have been a number of them. When your product is good, though, some of that gets swept away in the quality of it. Having said that, let's get into the spoiler-free review of HBO's House of the Dragon Episode 7. We start off this week at a funeral. If you missed last week, go watch that episode and then come back and finish this video. The funeral is not much of a spoiler and is largely unimportant except that it brought a large number of important characters into a confined space together. The important part I want to talk about is Lord Corlys Velarion's brother. I have no idea what his name is, and he has been in a grand total of about 5 minutes of screen time in 7 episodes. Anyway, he is basically Corlys's right-hand man, and thusly, I have issues with the idea that he would use a funeral to do something publicly that would cross his brother's ambitions. Matt Smith showed up this week and derailed what he was doing in the most backhanded way possible. The funeral went on, and then they were all moved onto a balcony for the wake. This was one seriously tense and awkward wake. Everyone was giving each other sidelong glances, and the cliques that formed were telling. Viserys sat in the midst of it all, knowing something was wrong, but Paddy Considine has been playing him with great skill as a weak man who can ignore things to an amazing degree. During all of this, Corlys realizes that his son Leonor is missing. Then he sees him below the balcony in the freezing ocean up to the waist. I'm not sure what the hell that was all about, and thinking about it, I guess it did add a little to the overall plot line this episode. The whole sequence and a scene later on made me realize once more that Steve Toussaint is wasted on this role. His ability deserves better than being the overly ambitious husband and lord to a woman who treats him like she is doing him a favor by being his wife, even as she claims to want nothing of what he wants. The actress who plays Rhaenys, Eve Best, has never impressed me much in her role. There is a better performance required from that role that she isn't giving. In most scenes with her, she has an air about her as if it is all just too tiresome for her to put in a more vigorous effort. Now, perhaps that is how she's being directed to play Rhaenys? If so, somebody needs to slap the director upside the head. Last week, my first impression of Olivia Cooke as Alicent was that she was somehow not as smart as when a younger Emily Carey played her. This week, I came to the same puzzling conclusion about Emma Darcy's Rhaenyra. Mistakes are being made by the character that are just baffling. Did younger Rhaenyra make mistakes? Of course. That is how she wound up married to Laenor before she was ready to choose who to marry. But those were mistakes of trusting the wrong person in the wrong circumstance. Multiple wrong persons. The mistakes the elder actresses in the roles of Alicent and Rhaenyra are making are ones of intelligence, wisdom, which is not at all the same thing as intelligence, and deviation from character. Younger Alicent and younger Rhaenyra would not be as stupid and careless in some of these scenes as they have been in the last 2 episodes. At least I don't think so. That is not to say they have been bad. Olivia Cooke has been alright. Not great. Not even good yet. Emma Darcy has been good, but not nearly as good as Millie Alcock was. To be fair to both actresses, they are both adults, weaving around each other as they approach a civil war on opposite sides from each other. What was reassuring was something I mentioned earlier. The brooding, menacing, magnetic Daemon was back. Not sure what the writers were going for in that last episode with him, and yes, I know fatherhood changes people, but it was not Daemon. This week, Matt Smith was back to dominating his scenes, even without having to say anything. Those who see the climax scene in this episode will understand what I'm talking about. He was there, but had a mere one line, if I recall correctly. And yet you could feel his presence even though he was extremely peripheral to what was going on. I have to give it to Daeron, Alicent and Viserys' youngest son. Last episode, the other royal cousins were teasing him, including his brother. This week, he sees an opportunity to right that wrong against him on multiple fronts and jumps to grab it. His desire matched his courage, and he seized it with both hands. Literally in some cases. And that bled into the inciting incident that climaxes the episode, and damn did that escalate quickly. I did not see it coming. Perhaps those who read the books or watched Game of Thrones expected it, but I was left mesmerized as a giant dragon-sized pile of excrement hit the fan. And it only pointed out the utter stupidity that is going on in regards to the race swapping of the Valyrians. If you have not seen last week, I'm going to drop a mild spoiler. If you did not figure out where this story was going yet, despite Lord Valyrian's race being an issue beyond the bitching of a couple of dozen members of the KKK left over, I can't help you. It weakened what should have been an intriguing storyline. Instead, the storyline and the race swapping merely make Viserys look even weaker and more imbecilic than he did last week, because Rhaenyra's kids look nothing like Daemon's, despite having very similar genetic makeup. If a near-albino woman marries a half-black man and produces lily-white kids, something has gone astray. And everyone should damn well know it the second the first kid pops out. For 2 weeks now, everyone has acted like the question of paternity is some kind of frickin' mystery worthy of Sherlock Holmes. And in the middle of the climactic scene, Alicent goes full retard. I know I said she was making stupid mistakes last week, but this took the damn cake. Especially since she went full on, "Not my little angel," when she did it, despite a fair amount of evidence to the contrary. Her father, Otto Hightower, was back to being the consummate weasel as he came around behind her to show her what she should have been smart enough to see for herself. Younger Alicent probably would have. At least younger Alicent of episode 5 would have. I mentioned Laenor earlier, acting the idiot. Well, by the end of this episode, I was quite fed up with how they wrote him. He was a warrior and one of his father's lieutenants in the War of the Stepstones. There's no way Corlys would trust him with that if he were as weak and stupid as he's been portrayed the last 2 weeks. I was intrigued with how they ended the episode, but I was still less than convinced that was the right way to write him. This episode was probably the most Targaryen episode yet, and it is beginning to resemble the Game of Thrones I recall people talking about with such interest when that show was in its first few seasons. The twist at the end of this episode was definitely well done. There was no hint that it was going to play out the way it did, and the lead up to the end had my brain going in a completely different direction. Compared to the last episode of Rings of Power, where I could have written out how I thought the episode was going to go about 5 minutes in and got most of the things spot on, this is so refreshing. The feeling I have when finishing Rings of Power is an overwhelming need for a nap. My feeling when House of the Dragon ends is the polar opposite. I want it to continue, and I'm exhilarated by what I just watched. The writing is so good for most of the 7 episodes to date. I'm amazed. Is the show perfect? No. Almost nothing Hollywood produces these days is. And perhaps that means those of us enjoying House of the Dragon are simply unused to competence. That is entirely possible. However, a few issues aside, I think House of the Dragon would have been well received even if it were released a decade ago. The only thing I think that would make this show flop is if they had released it immediately after Season 8 of Game of Thrones, while all of that show's fans were still in the metaphorical hospital with third-degree burns over 100% of their hearts and brains from what HBO did to them. The show is good, and I can't wait to see how they wrap up this season. That's all I have for you this week for House of the Dragon Episode 7. If you enjoy what I do here, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to let you know when a new video uploads, comment down below, and share the video to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. I will be back in the next day or so with a video on the mess that is Disney's attempt to make a Blade movie. See you then. Tschüss.